A heavy, matte black pistol slammed onto the Formica table, rattling the silverware just inches from Naomi Reed's hand. She didn't even blink. The entire diner fell dead silent, forks frozen mid-air, conversations dying instantly. Everyone in the room knew who Minho Jiang was, the ruthless head of the Jiang Syndicate, a man whose mere presence usually sent people running for the exits. Everyone, that is, except the exhausted waitress standing over his table with a coffee pot and a death wish. Minho stared up at her, his dark eyes intense and composed, waiting for her to tremble. His 3 bodyguards shifted behind him, hands reaching into their jackets, ready to turn the diner into a war zone. But Naomi didn't back down. Instead, she calmly slid a grease-stained coaster under the barrel of the gun to protect the table. "You can shoot me if you want," Naomi said, her voice steady as steel, "but you're still not allowed to smoke in here. Put it out." Wait, did she really just say that to the butcher of Busan? Before we find out if Naomi survives the next 10 seconds, I need to know, would you risk your life for minimum wage? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button right now, because the story you are about to hear is going to blow your mind. Trust me. Now, let's get into it. 1 minute earlier, Naomi had been having the worst shift of her life. She was running on 3 hours of sleep, her feet were blistering, and she had a final notice eviction letter burning a hole in her apron pocket. Her mom's hospital had called twice demanding payment she didn't have. She was broke, tired, and absolutely done with entitled men in expensive suits thinking they owned the place. So when Minho Jiang snapped his fingers at her, "You're fired. Get out before you get us all killed." The manager's voice cracked, high and pathetic. He didn't even have the decency to look Naomi in the eye, simply shoving her worn backpack into her chest and pointing a shaking finger toward the back exit. Naomi didn't beg. She didn't argue. She just ripped the grease-stained apron off her neck and threw it on the counter. The adrenaline from staring down the barrel of a gun was fading, replaced by the cold, crushing weight of reality. Standing up to a Mafia boss felt good for exactly 10 seconds. Now, she was just another unemployed woman with $4 in her pocket and a mother in a hospital bed she couldn't afford. She pushed through the heavy metal doors into the alley, the night air biting at her skin. She barely made it 3 steps before headlights flooded the pavement, blinding her. A sleek, black sedan blocked the alley exit. The engine purred with a low, expensive rumble that screamed danger. Naomi froze, her hand instinctively going to the pepper spray on her keychain, though she knew it would be useless against the kind of men who carried matte black pistols. The rear door opened. It wasn't the boss, but the man who had stood nearest to him, Kenji, the silent shadow. He adjusted his suit jacket, his movement fluid and precise. "Ms. Reed," Kenji said. It wasn't a question. "I'm not apologizing," Naomi snapped, masking her terror with the same grit she'd used inside. "And I'm not getting in that car. We don't want an apology." The voice came from inside the vehicle. Deep, calm, and laced with an authority that made the hairs on Naomi's arms stand up. Minho Jiang leaned forward, his face half illuminated by the street lamp. He wasn't angry. He looked fascinated. "I have an army of men who apologize to me, Naomi," Minho said, his gaze locking onto hers. "I have endless rows of people who fear me. What I do not have is someone who sees a loaded weapon and worries about the table finish. I hate bullies," she said, her grip on her bag tightening. "Rich ones, poor ones, it doesn't matter. Good. Because I am surrounded by them." Minho gestured to the empty seat across from him. "I have a negotiation in Seoul. High stakes. A nest of vipers. I need eyes that see what others miss. I need someone who doesn't care about rank or reputation." "You want me to be a spy?" Naomi laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "I'm a waitress, Mr. Jiang. I serve coffee. You read people. You saw my men reaching for their guns before they even moved. You saw the tension in the room and controlled it." He paused, letting the silence hang heavy. 1 week. I verify my associates, you tell me who is lying. In exchange, your mother's hospital debt is gone. Paid in full. Tonight. Naomi's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked at the dark alley, then at the open car door. It was a deal with the devil, but for the first time in her life, the devil was offering a way out. She stepped forward. I sit in the back. And no smoking. Minho's lips curved into a faint, dangerous smile. Deal. The elevator doors slid open with a whisper, revealing a penthouse that felt less like a home and more like a fortress of glass and steel. Seoul's skyline bled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, a dizzying grid of neon and darkness, but Naomi kept her back to the view. She wasn't here to sightsee. She was here to work. Don't touch anything, she muttered to herself, clutching her worn backpack straps as if they were a lifeline. Touch whatever you like, Minho said, walking past her and tossing his jacket onto a leather sofa that probably cost more than her mother's surgery. But we leave for the airport in 2 hours. My team needs to prep you. Prep me? Naomi bristled. I thought you hired me for my eyes, not my look. Minho poured a drink, the amber liquid splashing against crystal. In my world, appearance is the first language we speak. If you look weak, they will eat you alive before you even sit down. He snapped his fingers, and a side door opened. A team of 3 stylists marched in, pushing a rack of clothes that shimmered under the recessed lighting. They descended on Naomi with polite efficiency, pulling out dresses of silk and chiffon. Soft pinks, baby blues, flowing skirts designed to make a woman look decorative, harmless, and silent. One stylist held up a backless gown that looked like a whisper of smoke. For the lady, she said, smiling. Very elegant. Very obedient. Naomi looked at the dress, then at Minho, who was watching her over the rim of his glass. He was testing her again. No, Naomi said, pushing the hanger away. The stylist blinked. Excuse me. I said no. Naomi walked over to the rack, shoving aside the pastels and the frills. You want me to spot a wolf in a room full of vipers? Then don't dress me like a lamb. Her hand landed on the far end of the rack. A structure of sharp tailoring and midnight blue fabric. A wide-legged trouser suit with a structured blazer that looked like armor. The stylist gasped. That is too aggressive. It is not traditional. Good, Naomi said, grabbing it. I'm not traditional. 20 minutes later, Naomi stepped back into the living room. The transformation was absolute. Gone was the exhausted waitress in the stained vest. In her place stood a woman who looked like she could buy the building or burn it down. The suit fit her like a second skin, the sharp shoulders accentuating her posture, the dark fabric making her skin glow with lethal radiance. She hadn't let them soften her hair, instead, it was pulled back tight, exposing the sharp line of her jaw. The room went quiet. Minho set his glass down, the ice clinking against the bottom. He stood up slowly, his eye sweeping over her, not with desire, but with a sudden, sharp respect. He nodded, buttoning his own jacket. I stand corrected, Minho said, his voice low. You are not a spy, Naomi. You are a weapon. Let's go hunt, she replied. The tea house was a sanctuary of silence, smelling of roasted barley and old money, but to Naomi, it felt like a cage. She knelt beside Minho on a silk cushion, her legs protesting the unfamiliar posture, while 5 of the most dangerous men in Asia sipped tea with agonizing slowness. Minho had introduced her simply as his companion, a dismissal that allowed the clan elders to ignore her completely. They spoke in rapid-fire Korean, their voices rising in sharp staccato bursts. Naomi didn't need to speak the language to understand the tone, disrespect. They were baiting him, treating the wolf like a stray dog. Naomi played her part perfectly. She adjusted her blazer, checked her nails, and offered vapid, wide-eyed smiles to anyone who glanced her way. To them, she was just an accessory, a pretty American tourist Minho had picked up to flaunt his westernization. Mr. Jang has been away too long, a woman's voice cut through the tension. Hannah Kim sat across the low table, ethereal in a pale suit that screamed corporate royalty. She was Minho's childhood friend, the bridge between the old world and the new. She poured tea for the eldest patriarch with practiced grace, offering a sympathetic glance to Naomi. He forgets that patience is a virtue here. I haven't forgotten, Minho replied, his voice tight. I just don't have time for theater. Naomi leaned back, feigning boredom, but her senses were dialed to 11. She watched the room. The bodyguards by the paper screens were statues. The elders were focused on Minho. But Hannah? While the men argued, Hannah's hand rested on the delicate rim of her porcelain cup. Her manicured index finger moved against the ceramic. Tap. Tap tap. Pause. Tap. It wasn't a nervous tick. It was too rhythmic. Too precise. Naomi shifted slightly, narrowing her eyes. Hannah wasn't looking at Minho. She was locking eyes with the lead elder's bodyguard, a hulking man with a scar running through his eyebrow. As Minho slammed his hand on the table to make a point, Hannah's finger tapped again. A confirmation. Naomi's stomach twisted. The ignorant girlfriend act had worked. Hannah assumed Naomi was too busy admiring the architecture to notice the sabotage. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a coordinated performance, and the woman pouring the tea was the conductor. Minho thought he was fighting a battle of words, but he was already standing in the middle of a minefield, and Hannah was holding the detonator. Naomi slowly lowered her hand to her lap, her muscles coiling tight. The tea party was over. It was Hannah. Naomi didn't wait for the partition to close. She said it the moment the heavy car door slammed shut, sealing them inside the armored silence of the limousine. Minho laughed, a short, sharp sound of disbelief. He loosened his tie, looking weary. You are tired, Naomi. The jet lag is getting to you. I saw her, Naomi insisted, leaning forward, her eyes blazing. She was tapping on her cup. It wasn't nerves. It was a signal. Every time you pushed back against the elders, she tapped. She was signaling the guard with the scar. Minho's face hardened. The amusement vanished, replaced by a wall of ice. Hannah is not just an associate. We grew up in the same orphanage. She is the sister I never had. Do not insult her to save your pride because you found nothing. I found everything. Naomi shouted, frustration bubbling over. She looked at you like you were already dead, Minho. She's playing you. Enough. Minho turned away, staring out at the blurred neon of the highway. You do not understand loyalty. In my world, history is blood. We are done here. He reached for his phone to check the market reports, dismissing her. Naomi slumped back, watching him with a mixture of anger and pity. He was the most powerful man she had ever met, yet he was blind. Minho unlocked his screen. He frowned. He tapped an app, waited, then tapped another. His brow furrowed. What is it? Naomi asked, her anger replaced by a sudden, cold dread. My accounts, Minho whispered, his voice hollow. All of them. Personal, offshore, the syndicate operational funds. They've been flagged for laundering. Zero balance. Who has the access codes? Naomi asked, though she already knew the answer. Minho looked at her, the realization crashing down on him like a physical blow. The betrayal was so absolute it seemed to paralyze him. Only Hannah. Before he could speak, the car swerved violently. Tires screeched against asphalt, the smell of burning rubber filling the cabin. The driver shouted something in Korean, panic rising in his throat. Get down! Minho roared, throwing his arm across Naomi's chest just as the rear window shattered. Motorcycles flanked the car, riders in black helmets raising submachine guns. Glass rained down on them like diamonds. Minho fumbled for his weapon, but the hesitation had cost him. The ambush wasn't a warning, it was an execution. She didn't just take your money, Naomi yelled over the roar of gunfire as the car spun out of control. She sold you out. The safe house was a ghost of a home, a concrete box buried deep in Incheon's industrial district. It smelled of damp cement and neglect, a stark contrast to the crystalline steel fortress they had fled. Minho locked the heavy steel door and immediately collapsed onto a dust-covered sofa, the adrenaline finally abandoning him. He looked ruined. His suit was torn, his knuckles bruised, and a shallow cut above his eyebrow bled sluggishly, ruining the perfection of his face. He didn't say a word, just reached for a bottle of whiskey left on a side table and poured a glass with a shaking hand. He didn't drink it, he just stared at the amber liquid as if it held the answers to why his sister-in-arms had tried to kill him. "Let me look at that cut," Naomi said softly, finding a clean rag in the kitchenette. "It is nothing," Minho muttered, but he didn't pull away when she stepped between his knees. "It's not nothing," she replied, dabbing at the blood. "You're in shock. You just lost your entire life in 20 minutes. "I didn't lose it," Minho whispered, the pain in his voice jagged. "It was stolen by the only person I trusted. I was born into this violence, Naomi. I inherited a throne of knives. Hannah, she was the only one who didn't want the crown. Also I thought." Naomi paused, her hand resting near his temple. "We fight different wars, Minho. You fight to keep your power. I fight just to keep the lights on. But the feeling? That feeling of drowning while everyone else watches? I know that scar." Minho looked up, his dark eyes searching hers. For the first time, the boss mask was gone. He saw the exhaustion etched into her face, the resilience that came from years of being told no and surviving anyway. "I have spent my life surrounded by people who claimed to would die for me," Minho said, his voice dropping to a rough murmur. "And yet, here I am, drinking cheap whiskey with a woman I tried to buy, and she is the only one standing." "I told you," Naomi said, her breath catching as his hand moved to cover hers, his thumb tracing the pulse at her wrist. "I hate bullies." The air in the room shifted, thick with a sudden, magnetic pull. The danger outside felt miles away. In the dim light, two survivors from opposite worlds leaned in, drawn together by the wreckage. Minho's gaze dropped to her lips, and for a terrifying, electric moment, Naomi forgot about the hit squad, the debt, and the gun on the table. She only felt the heat of his hand and the desperate, raw connection of two people who had nothing left to lose but each other. The moment shattered like glass. The intimate silence of the safe house was ripped apart by the screech of tires on gravel and the blinding wash of high beams cutting through the rot-eaten curtains. Red laser dots danced across the peeling wallpaper, searching. "They found us," Minho said, his voice instantly cold, the lover dying and the soldier returning. He moved away from her, checking the magazine of his pistol. It was empty. Naomi grabbed the tire iron she'd seen by the door. "How many?" "Too many," Minho replied, looking through a crack in the blackened window. "Hannah didn't send a squad. She sent an army." He turned back to her. The look in his eyes wasn't fear, it was a devastating finality. He crossed the room in 2 strides, grabbing Naomi by the shoulders. His grip was hard, almost painful. "Listen to me," he commanded, his face inches from hers. "You are not my partner. You are not my spy. You are a civilian I kidnapped for leverage. Do you understand?" "What?" "No," Naomi shook her head, panic clawing at her throat. "I'm not letting you go out there alone. We fight. There is no we anymore, Naomi. If they think you are with me, they will put a bullet in your head before you can blink. If you are a victim, you survive." He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers for one brief, agonizing second. "Survive." Before she could scream, he shoved her hard toward the shadows of the kitchenette. Then he turned and kicked the heavy steel door open. Minho Jiang walked out into the blinding white glare of the floodlights with his hands raised, not in defeat, but with the arrogance of a king greeting his executioners. "Hold fire," he roared, his voice echoing off the shipping containers. Hannah's lieutenant stepped forward, flanked by a dozen heavily armed mercenaries. "On your knees, traitor!" "I am done," Minho shouted, dropping his empty gun to the dirt. "I surrender." "But the woman inside? She is useless to you." "Just a waitress I dragged along for insurance. She knows nothing." Naomi watched from the darkness of the doorway, tears blurring her vision. She wanted to run to him, to fight, but she stayed frozen, knowing that moving would make his sacrifice meaningless. "Check the house," the lieutenant barked. She's tied up in the back, Minho lied smoothly as rough hands grabbed him, forcing him to his knees. A black bag was shoved over his head. Let her go. She's just a loose end. They dragged him toward the waiting van. As the engine roared to life, Naomi sank to the floor, the tire iron cold in her hand, listening to the sound of the man she loved being taken to his death to buy her life. The silence left behind by the van's taillights was heavier than the gunfire. Naomi stood in the doorway of the safe house, the cold wind drying the tears on her cheeks. She looked at the empty gravel where Minho had knelt. He had given her a chance to run, to disappear back into her invisible life of dirty dishes and unpaid bills. She turned around and walked back inside. 10 minutes later, the crunch of tires signaled not enemies, but ghosts. Kenji stumbled through the door, flanked by 2 blooded enforcers. They looked like walking corpses, shoulders slumped, eyes hollowed out by defeat. They had come to salvage weapons, not their boss. He is gone, Kenji said, spotting Naomi. He didn't even look angry. He just looked tired. If Hana has him, he is already dead. We need to scatter. The syndicate falls tonight. He isn't dead, Naomi said, her voice cutting through the gloom. And we aren't scattering. Kenji laughed bitterly. Go home, Waitress. You don't give orders here. The king is captured. The war is lost. The king didn't get captured, Naomi stepped forward, blocking their path to the exit. She stood tall, channeling every ounce of the fury Minho had admired in the diner. The king surrendered. He walked out there with an empty gun to save me. A nobody. The men paused, shifting uncomfortably. You call yourselves soldiers. Naomi walked up to Kenji, poking a finger into his bruised chest. Minho Jiang has spent his whole life protecting you, paying you, bleeding for you. And the first time he needs you to bleed for him, you want to run? He didn't surrender because he was weak. He surrendered because he has something Hana will never have. Honor. Kenji stared at her, his jaw working. The shame in the room was palpable, thick enough to choke on. I'm going to get him back, Naomi announced, walking to the table where a pile of scavenged equipment lay. With or without you. She didn't pick up a gun. She grabbed a roll of industrial duct tape and a heavy, serrated hunting knife. She grabbed 2 flashlights and a bundle of road flares. Hana expects a Mafia assault, Naomi said, taping a thick magazine around her forearm. Poor man's body armor. She expects men in suits with pistols. She doesn't expect a waitress who knows how to handle a grease fire. Kenji watched her strap a flare to a canister of cleaning solvent. He looked at his men, then back at the woman taping magazines to her shins. A spark of life returned to his eyes. We have 1 van, Kenji said quietly, checking the slide of his pistol. And 3 magazines between us. Naomi ripped a strip of tape with her teeth. Then let's make them count. The shipping yard was a maze of rusted steel and shadows, rain slicking the asphalt. Kenji killed the van's headlights, coasting into the perimeter. 3 guards at the north gate, he whispered. Not for long, Naomi said. She didn't have a silencer, she had chemistry. She lit the road flare tape to the canister of industrial solvent and rolled it under the gatehouse. The explosion wasn't lethal, but the blinding white phosphorus light and the choking cloud of chemical smoke sent the guard stumbling out, coughing and blinded. Naomi moved not like a soldier, but like a storm. She swung a heavy metal pipe, scavenged from the safe house, cracking it against the kneecap of the first guard. Kenji dropped the other 2 with suppressed shots. Go! Kenji shouted, laying down cover fire as alarms began to wail. Naomi sprinted toward the central warehouse, her lungs burning. She kicked open the side door, the scene inside freezing her blood. Minho was on his knees in the center of the floor, battered and bloody. Hana stood over him, a silver pistol pressed against his forehead. Any last words, brother? Hana asked, her voice trembling with the high of victory. Yeah, Minho rasped, lifting his head. Look behind you. Naomi didn't hesitate. She activated the fire extinguisher she'd strapped to her back, not spraying it, but hurling it with all her strength. It slammed into a stack of oil drums, creating a deafening metallic clang that echoed like a gunshot. Hannah flinched, turning her head for a fraction of a second. That was all Minho needed. He lunged upward, driving his shoulder into Hannah's stomach. The gun went off, the bullet tearing into the concrete inches from his ear. "Naomi, get down!" Minho roared, grappling with Hannah for the weapon. Hannah's bodyguard charged at Minho's exposed